Have you ever heard of a country that bans salt shakers on dining tables? Yes, such a country exists in the world, and that country is Uruguay. If you visit restaurants or eateries in Uruguay, don't be surprised if you don't see a salt shaker on the table. Want to use salt? You'll have to ask the staff to bring it out. This may sound strange, but there is a long story behind it, related to health, culture, and heated debates in Uruguay. So, why do Uruguayans do this? Are they trying to save salt, or is it because the water there has no salt? Imagine you're enjoying a famous asado, a grilled meat dish, at a restaurant in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay. The dish is delicious, the meat tender. And you're about to dig in. But suddenly, you realize there's no salt shaker on the table. You call the server, and they respond, "Salt?" You need to ask for it. Your experience will certainly feel different than in other countries. But this is no coincidence, it's a strict regulation in Uruguay, especially in the capital, Montevideo. Since 2015, the government of Uruguay passed a law prohibiting salt shakers or condiments like soy sauce from being placed on tables in restaurants, schools, and even hospital cafeterias. If you want salt, you must ask the staff. It's a very strict regulation. What is the purpose of this rule? By not having a salt shaker right in front of you, you're less likely to add salt to your food. This might even make you forget to ask for it, inadvertently reducing your salt intake. It may seem simple, but it's a clever psychological strategy used by Uruguayans. Why has Uruguay become so strict about salt? Why has salt become the enemy of the people here? The answer lies in a serious health issue the country is facing: hypertension and cardiovascular diseases. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, nearly 40% of Uruguay's population suffers from high blood pressure, a very high rate in Latin America. Hypertension is not just an individual issue, it leads to severe consequences such as stroke, heart attacks, and kidney failure, and the main cause is salt, particularly sodium. When we consume too much salt, the body retains water, which increases pressure on blood vessels and raises blood pressure. To put it simply, WHO recommends that a person should consume less than 5 grams of salt daily, which is roughly a small teaspoon. However, before this regulation was applied, the average Uruguayan consumed 9 grams of salt daily, double the recommended amount. Interestingly, Uruguay's current salt consumption level is similar to that of Vietnam. So where does this number come from? Not just from salt shakers on the dining table but also from traditional dishes like asado, bread, sausages, and particularly processed foods like cold cuts and fast food. Bread is a common food in Uruguay. And often, a loaf can contain a significant amount of salt. In a study by the Ministry of Health in Uruguay in 2018, about 1/3 of deaths in the country were related to cardiovascular diseases, with hypertension being the leading cause. What's even more concerning is that it's not just the elderly. Children, even teenagers, are also facing hypertension. The main reason is the modern diet, with an increase in processed and fast food, both of which contain a lot of salt. However, the problem doesn't stop at hypertension. Uruguay is also facing another issue: childhood obesity. The country has the highest rate of childhood obesity in Latin America, with over 30% of children aged 5 to 15 being overweight or obese. And as we know, obesity often comes with diets high in sugar, salt, and fat. Snack foods like chips, cookies, and sausages, which Uruguayan children love, are all high in salt. Therefore, the government of Uruguay decided to take action. Although they can't completely ban salt, as it is an essential part of life, they want to change people's eating habits, starting with the smallest things, like removing the salt shaker from the dining table. But could such a small change solve the bigger problem? Another measure was to reduce the amount of salt in bread, an indispensable food in Uruguayan meals. Since 2016, bakeries in Montevideo have been required to reduce the salt content in bread by 10% and include salt warnings on the packaging. The stores must also offer at least 10% of their menu with no salt so customers can choose healthier options. However, could banning the salt shaker affect Uruguay's food culture? Asado, their famous grilled meat dish, is often enhanced with salt to bring out the natural flavor of the meat, and Uruguayans take great pride in this dish, considering it part of their national identity. So, how will people react when the salt shaker disappears from the dining table? Surely, there will be debates. Many people, especially those who love traditional cuisine, feel this rule goes too far. Surveys in Montevideo show that many believe asado without salt is no longer traditional. Some restaurants have also reflected that this rule has diminished the dining experience. Especially for tourists who come to Uruguay to enjoy authentic asado, where salt is an important factor. However, many support this regulation. They believe that if removing the salt shaker helps reduce diseases and saves lives, it's a price worth paying, even if it makes the food a bit bland. Additionally, many parents in Uruguay feel more at ease knowing their children are consuming less salt. In schools, not only has the salt shaker been removed, but the cafeteria menus have also been changed, reducing fried foods and increasing vegetables. Interestingly, this regulation has led to a new trend, where Uruguayan chefs are finding creative ways to prepare flavorful dishes with less salt. For example, they are using local herbs or even experimenting with lemon juice as a salt substitute. This shows that despite the debates, Uruguayans are finding ways to adapt and innovate to preserve the distinct flavors of their cuisine. To compare, let's look at some other countries. The average salt consumption in Uruguay is 9 grams a day, slightly lower than in Thailand, where the average salt intake is 10 to 12 grams per day. In Thailand, salt mainly comes from fish sauce and spicy salads, but unlike Uruguay, Thailand hasn't implemented a ban on salt shakers, instead encouraging people to reduce salt intake through media campaigns. Meanwhile, Finland and Canada have been pioneers in reducing salt consumption. Since the 1970s, Finland has partnered with food producers to reduce salt in bread and sausages, resulting in a decrease in salt consumption from 12 grams to 7 grams daily, with a significant drop in hypertension rates. Uruguay seems to be learning from this model, but with its own approach, combining strictness and creativity. In Vietnam, according to a 2019 study, the average salt intake is between 9 and 10 grams daily, similar to Uruguay. However, Vietnam does not have specific regulations about salt shakers, but instead, there are recommendations to reduce salt intake and cut down on fish sauce. Who knows, perhaps one day, Vietnam will adopt Uruguay's approach. So, after a decade of this regulation, what results has Uruguay achieved? According to a report from Uruguay's Ministry of Health, the average salt consumption has decreased from 9 grams per day to around 7.5 grams per day. Although this is still higher than the WHO recommendation, it is clearly a significant improvement. The rate of hypertension in children and teenagers has also slightly decreased, though not drastically. More importantly, the public's awareness of the dangers of salt has greatly increased. Many families have started cooking with less salt, and food brands have introduced low-salt products to meet this demand. However, not everything is perfect. Some restaurants are still finding ways to bypass the law, such as by providing salt in small containers or encouraging customers to ask for more seasoning. Some people also complain that food in schools and hospitals now tastes bland. This shows that changing eating habits is not something that can be done immediately. It requires time, patience, and the cooperation of the entire community. So, what lesson can Uruguay learn from this? First, health must always be the top priority, and sometimes drastic measures are needed to create change. Second, culture and health can coexist, as long as we are creative and open in our approach. Third, don't underestimate small changes, like removing the salt shaker from the dining table. These seemingly small changes can have a huge impact. What do you think of Uruguay's regulation? Do you agree with removing the salt shaker from the table, or do you think this rule is too strict? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.